get feedback. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Okay, good. It's on both pages. Yay. So let me,
Hopefully.
all right. So now that we've got it up, thanks everyone for bearing with us for tech. I just want to introduce Dr. Huang. She has a PhD in neuroscience, postdoctoral training in epidemiology, and she is a holistic brain health practitioner. So I thought I'd just ask if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure. Well, the reason why I got into this in the first place was because I was struggling with my own issues. I got very interested in neuroscience back in the early 90s when it was the decade of the brain. But I've always been interested in how the brain works because of some early things I read. Actually, believe it or not, multiple personality disorder was what brought me into neuroscience. And it turns out it actually doesn't really exist to the degree that I thought it did with civil. So that's, but that brought me into the field, interestingly enough. So I've been interested in the brain, but I also had issues myself. I had lifelong depression, anxiety, learning disabilities, never diagnosed with ADHD, but probably would have qualified if I let myself get evaluated in that way. I had a more precedent issue that had to do with about accumulation of knowledge, and I've learned a lot more about that since. And so I had a lot of issues, and I sought out, I had the best access to the best psychiatry at Hopkins, for example, and they gave me drugs, and I just didn't believe that drugs and counseling were enough to get at the root causes. I really believed, and I've always believed that I have to address the root causes. What I didn't realize was that how much addressing the root causes could completely change things, and how effective that would be.
Wow, I love to hear how it brings us in. I feel like so much of our passions are what bring us into the things where we really make big differences for everyone and touch others' lives. So thank you so much for sharing this. It looks like
Hmm.
your own story has brought this gift to everyone. And that's why I'm so happy to have you on. I wanted to ask, what are the parts of the brain that intrigued you? I know you are very, very much holistic, but what are the first things that intrigued you beyond your own personal story?
Yeah, my intrigue has always been about what's going on. I ask myself, what is going on? For example, with multiple personality, which again is not a thing as much. There may be two personalities, but the civil story apparently was concocted, unfortunately. But I'll inform you about the questions I would ask, and that is, I would say, how can a brain function in that way, basically, right? What is going on in the brain that allows it to function in that way? But now it doesn't exist. That story doesn't exist. But Alzheimer's was my research, and those are the kinds of questions. So I was interested in the specific areas as the research drove me towards that area, right? So in Alzheimer's disease, the hippocampus and learning disabilities, the hippocampus is intimately involved. I think also with Alzheimer's disease, what happens is that there's a lot of frontal cortex regulation, right? Issues of like the frontal cortex is right here, right? And it's your ability to adult. It governs your ability to plan and make
Yep.
decisions and so forth. And if it's going haywire, you're not able to make as good decisions. So the elderly are very subject, for example, to scam artists.
Right.
And that's because the frontal connections are become weakened, especially in disease states.
That's so
And I think that
interesting.
that's very much involved in ADHD as well.
That's what I was going to say. There's so much with the executive functioning and the prefrontal cortex and the reward seeking behaviors and all of those things,
Yeah.
making poor decisions. I find it a lot with finance too, like making bad decisions, bankruptcy, like all these things that come into that frontal cortex. That's so interesting that you brought it up. And I guess leading into that sort of trying to make better decisions. So, what are like the root causes? What happens in our brain when things aren't working well? Like, what are some of the things that you've seen like that really impact the overall body and then impact that dysfunction in the brain?
Yeah. I will say there's so many things. Basically, everything in our environment can affect us somehow, right? But I'll say that it's a lot of people think it's genes or it's environment, and now we know that there's an interaction between genes and environment.
Right.
And for the listeners who don't know, there's also the epigenetic aspects, which I
Yes.
think is really the all the rage, right?
Yes.
And the epigenetic aspects are not just that gene meets environment and the environment determines the regulation of the gene, that is how a gene is expressed or how a gene turns into behavior.
Right.
But also the inherited effects matter. So grandma's experience, grandpa's experience, ancestors 6 generations, ancestors beyond that matter. So we don't all come into the world on an equal playing field. It's not just about the environment that we grow up in, but it's also about our inherited past. And so this is reason why I think there's a lot of cultural differences between us, is because a lot of that is driven by our epigenetic history. If a culture has a lot of trauma versus a culture that doesn't have a lot of trauma, the culture with a lot of trauma is going to have disadvantages from the get-go.
Yes.
And that's because of the trauma that the belief systems and the emotions that already drive how they see the world determines how we are pre-wired and how we come into the world. So, you know, we often have this idea that we're all created equal, and it's so not true. There's a huge gap between somebody who has a stable environment and a relatively stable epigenetic history. Nobody does have a complete stable, and one that comes from decades of trauma. There's really just a huge gap. And I think we need to recognize that and that's why I'm such a believer that people who don't have these advantages do need that support, because we're not all created equal.
I am so glad you said that. Epigenetics is, of course, I've read the books on ADHD, Dr. Joel Niger, and a couple other ones about epigenetics. And what you're saying about the trauma and the generational trauma is just mind-blowing to me, because you don't realize how that can impact. You don't think that the fact that your grandmother had, you know, whatever happened to her when she was younger is affecting you, or could be affecting my daughter, right? It's amazing to know that that can happen. And so I want to get into root cause talk with you specifically about how you help clients with that. But before we do it, I wanted to bring up a little bit of information in all the body systems, because I know that you have a ton of information about that too. And then I'd love to go back to the emotional part and the trauma too.
Yeah. And I just realized I just touched on the epigenetic component of root causes, but there's also toxins and pathogens and certainly trauma. And those are kind of the big ones, but there's so many more. So,
Right.
But that's a good start, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. There's so much to know. It's wonderful to interview you because you have the background on all these different things. So if we're talking about, I guess we'll talk about, do you want to talk about inflammation next then? Like how that can affect, how the inflammation in the body can impact the brain?
Yeah. And forgive me, my cat likes to chip in every once in a while. But in terms of inflammation, yeah, one thing that I think is really important, that I'd like Western medicine to pay more attention to, and what I'm discovering with brain health in general, is that oftentimes if we're struggling, there's inflammation involved. And it may be happening at what I do is, because I ask questions of the subconscious, I can do things like, I can ask, okay, on a scale from 0 to 10, how inflamed is somebody? Whether it's generalized or specific and localized to specific areas, right? And I usually find there's something is not working, and not all the time, but it's often inflammation is involved. Now, it could be blood flow, it could be other things, it could be a lack of nutrients getting to the system, it could be chi, issues with the chi as understood in Eastern medicine. So there can be a lot of things, and that's just the starting point. But inflammation is usually a result of either toxins or pathogens, and there could be other things that exacerbate it, but toxins and pathogens are certainly the most inflammatory.
Interesting.
So that is, it's a sort of a key component. And I think if Western medicine wants to really move forward in terms of brain health, they have to understand that inflammation, local, and it could be very localized. So for example, in epilepsy, there can be the focal points of epilepsy could be about inflammation. And that's what I found so far. So, I think it's really important. And I certainly brain fog, when people say, I've got brain fog issues, that's been inflammation every single time. So I think that we need to really understand that inflammation in the brain does happen, and what is causing, if we want to get at root causes, if we really want to address the underlying problems, then we've got to start looking at the sequestered toxins and pathogens that happen in the brain, and that does happen. even if we can't detect it necessarily through blood markers and so forth. Because when it gets sequestered, it's not necessarily coming out into the blood where we can detect it.
Right.
So, I think Western medicine is going to have to start improving their methods in finding these things, or improving their ability to find these things in order to really address root causes.
Right. Oh my gosh, this is so interesting. So I guess there's some other things that impact our brain health beyond inflammation. What are some of the things that, so you find pathogenetic, and then can you, if someone works with you, they can find resources to help alleviate those different problems they have, if it's a pathogen or.
Actually, when they work with me, I do something that's going to seem a little woo-woo. I have to warn you. I have been given this gift. I found this out a year ago, that I'm able to channel frequencies. And what that does, it's pretty insane. But what it does is it actually allows me to help people detox, whether it's toxins or pathogens. And so because I have a spirit guide who, I just need to specify the frequency. I have a spirit guide and I ask, hey, can you deliver a frequency to this specific area? I do this all the time with, it could be, and it doesn't have to be in the brain. Sometimes it's like in the thyroid or the parathyroid. All these systems in the body can affect what's going on in the brain, right? Or how we function. And so I can ask my spirit guide to help me deliver frequencies in order to kill pathogens or toxins. And that even includes the coronavirus. So there's a lot that I can do with that. I haven't found my limits on that yet, but there may be limits. I actually, no, there's one limit I have realized, is that, if you have a reoccurring pathogen, there are pathogens like, for example, HSV, right? Herpes simplex.
Yep.
That have a reputation, or they're known to flare up and then die back, and then flare up and then die back, and they kind of stay with you for the rest of your life. So that, for those types of viruses, I know that if they flare up, I can get them down to 0, but I don't think at this point in time, and with science and when things change, this could change. But right now at this point, I don't know if I'm not getting the sense that I can really permanently get rid of pathogens. I can just take the flare up down to what feels like 0, but that doesn't mean they're not going to come back. So that's where that's the limit I have reached, or I've noticed I've reached so far.
Wow, that is so amazing.
Yeah.
I know that the body is amazing and it can definitely heal itself. This question I didn't tell you before. What do you think about gut health in terms of brain
health? Oh, gut health is so important. Yes, that's another very key component. So yes, the discovery of the microbiome and its importance in neurotransmitters, and how the vagus nerve is, it's 80% afferent, or comes up rather than efferent, right, which goes down. So yes, the discovery of the gut and its involvement in brain health is key. I actually graduated from University of Rochester, and while we weren't looking at the gut, a key aspect, or one of the gems of University of Rochester, is that they're just huge in terms of the field of psychoneuroimmunology, which is the idea that, like, your immune system is intimately related to what goes on in your mental and your cognitive health, right? Yeah. So we've known that for a long time. I had professors talking about the receptors, like, for example, norepinephrine found in different areas of the immune system, right? And so we know that that other systems regulate or determine or influence what goes on in the brain. And you know what? We are way behind the times, but the Chinese have known this for centuries, right? So the Chinese will say things like, oh, if the liver isn't happy, you're more likely to feel anger, so there's, they have a different sense of it. And what's really interesting about the emotion code, which is you were going to ask me about that later, but that, I practice something called the emotion code and the body code. The emotion code is a subset of the body code. And the body code, I'll just back up, allows me to identify and release the underlying causes of what clients are struggling with.
Right.
So I'm getting in tune with the subconscious, asking the subconscious questions, and then we identify the underlying imbalances and release them. And so what Dr. Bradley Nelson has discovered, and he's the one that put this forth. He said it was a download from God, is how he says
developed the emotion code and the body code. He kind of like put this into motion, right?
Exactly. Yeah. He's manifested it, even though he says it's from God. So anyways, he he discovered, he's a chiropractor by training, and
Mhm.
he discovered that people would have emotional releases on the table, as he's like adjusting them.
Mhm.
And what he discovered was that we have trapped emotions and they can be anywhere in our body. So Western medicine used to think they're in the amygdala. Then now they're saying that they're in emotional circuits of the brain. So it's a little bit more complex. But now they're realizing, okay, the microbiome is involved. And
Yeah.
psychoneuroimmunology says it's coming from the immune system, or it's, the immune system contributes. You definitely know that when you're sick, you're not as happy, right? So that's
Right. You're
really
sad. Yes.
basic knowledge, right?
Pain,
And
all that.
Chinese medicine says they emanate from the organs, and Candace Pert says that they emanate from the peptides, which is essentially anywhere, right?
All over, right?
And
Tissues. It's
and
so interesting.
yeah, and so Dr. Bradley Nelson has also confirmed, and we are able to do this when I work with clients individually. I can ask, okay, do you have a trapped emotion? The answer is always yes, because that's if
Hundreds of
you
them.
weren't, you would be dead.
Yeah.
And so we can identify where that trapped emotion is located. And so it can contribute to your ability to recover from injury, for example. Oftentimes clients, might have, after an injury, they may be, have a stiff shoulder, or they may have residual pain that lasts for a long time. It's often trapped emotions. Okay.
Right.
Now that may not be the whole story. It can be more complex than that. And I can go into that in a whole nother interview that'll take a while. But the point is there's a lot of different drivers that can drive chronic pain and so forth, but trapped emotions is certainly one of them. So what's fascinating is that our emotional health impacts our physical health, and our
Yeah.
physical health does impact our emotional health, and it's all integrated.
Yes.
And we're not just cut off at the head at all.
Right.
And I think
Not
Western
just the
medicine
brain
is
up
really coming
here. It's
around to that.
all connected.
Yeah.
No, 100%. Some people are asking how to contact you. So I'll just make sure that I'm going to drop all the links to your website and everything. Of course, this is fascinating to all of us. I love the
Yeah.
emotion code and body code and what it can do. I don't know how to do it, but I've had some sessions done for me and my family, and I think it's really helpful. I do want to ask you, there was something else you were asking that I wanted to go. I want to make sure I covered my other questions too. Um, but I feel like when you're working with a client, so um, how do you know if it's generational? Do you just ask?
Yeah, the subconscious knows.
Okay.
We can trace it back to who it's from and so forth.
So
And sometimes, I'm not a person that picks up stories necessarily, but I've gotten some really interesting things, that like limiting beliefs. Like, for example, I was working with an Asian man who's had a belief around, his ancestor had a belief around, the white people always inflicting opium on them. And it was so
yeah,
true. I mean, at that time, white people were inflicting opium on the Chinese.
yeah,
So, sometimes you can get some very interesting stories that drive our current behavior.
right. That we don't, and we don't even understand why it's doing that, and that's why it's so amazing to me how you can release these things and find them. I just love how much you're also integrating the health part because to me, I saw it as a separate thing, but the way you're integrating it all together is just so fascinating. I want to ask you one more question about so when you're getting to root causes, but brain health in general, like we were talking a little bit about screen time and about different things. Like I'm a really big advocate of being outside. We moved to somewhere warmer so my children could be outside more since we're all ADHD. And can you tell us about
So
some
fun.
preventative measures we can take for brain health? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, one of the so some key things that make a difference are, one is exercise, right? I actually discovered that early on in life that it helps regulate my mood
Mhm.
substantially. In fact, it's been even shown to be as effective or more effective than antidepressants. So
Yeah.
I exercise regularly, and if you have ADHD, you're probably going to need to exercise more than most people, right? Makes a huge difference. It brings
Mhm.
oxygen to your brain, and if you do it in the morning, it sets you up well for the rest of the day.
Wow,
So
you get motivation.
keep moving. Yeah,
Yeah.
keep moving if you have ADHD. The other thing is, and unfortunately, this is a tough time to be telling you this because we are only connected really through our screens these days. But getting away from those screens and getting outdoors, and
Yeah.
yes, you have it. I mean, it's getting outdoors for so many different reasons. My favorite book around that is called The Nature Fix. Absolutely love it, and it's all about how nature impacts our brain. The one thing they didn't cover is about earthing, and I don't know if you know much or talk much about your audience to your audience about earthing, but it is about when you get in and I didn't believe it. I rolled my eyes at this whole stuff for a long time, but I've
Yeah.
read so much now
Is
and
it like
experienced this
grounding?
with clients. It's grounding. It's the
It's
same thing as
grounding, right? Okay,
grounding.
keep
Yeah.
going. Yeah, talk about it.
Yeah. And so that's the idea of actually getting in nature where you're connected to the ground,
Mhm.
not cement, not wood, but the ground,
Right.
or the beach.
Yes.
And, like swimming in natural waters also
Mhm.
helps with grounding. But
Yes.
what it does is it really does calm down our nervous system. When you say you feel grounded, you literally are feeling more grounded, right?
Right, right.
And that actually slows our brain waves down so that we can be more present in the moment. I actually try to hike every single week because I find that for days afterwards, I'm so much more present. And part of this is the fact that our brains, there's kind of like, our brains are sort of like operating systems. There's different networks that, get activated, right? So
Right.
there's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous
Yep.
system, but there's also the default versus the executive mode network, right? There are these
Right.
different networks that go on in the brain. And, we, in our thinking paradigm, you know, our brains like to think, but at the same time, they have to quiet down to more of a default state where you're kind of just in this sort of, this happens a lot, like if you're just doing dishes or if you're in the shower, right? Your brain's just kind of calming down so that new ideas can generate, and it's sort of, there's an equivalent of the parasympathetic versus sympathetic nervous system. It's important for our brains to have that quiet time in order for when we want to be productive, for it to work more effectively, right? But
Yes.
you can't stay in that one mode the whole time. Your brain does not work as effectively. And so it's really important to have that balance of being able to calm your brain down and then working when you want to. So if you're the kind of person that works too hard or expects too much of yourself, hush. Your brain is going to start, it doesn't work as well. Like I find that if I'm trying to do too much, I forget a lot more, right? Things,
Yeah.
my schedule, things fall off my schedule, or unfortunately, it's something I've forgotten, or I forget words more often too. And so our brains really do need that time to recuperate and rest
Right.
in order for us to be at our best. So exercise and getting outdoors in nature and getting that groundedness, but also there's all these you get a lot of aromatherapy. It boosts your immune system. There's so much, not just in terms of the olfactory sense, but also the auditory, the calming your
Mhm.
brain down with just the quiet, because the noise is stimulate is it can really stress us out. And
Right.
then there's the EMF, the electromagnetic frequencies that we pick
Yes.
up from Wi-Fi
Mhm.
and our computer systems and Wi-Fi, 5G, for example. All
Everywhere.
that does not help us with focus. It actually, there's definitely a link between that. I shouldn't say definitely, but I've seen it, and the research that has been done has shown a link between EMF and difficulties concentrating. Right? We don't know if it's
Right.
ADHD, but definitely difficulty concentrating. And so, again, getting that brain quieted in nature is a really great way to sort of remedy yourself, or
Right.
rebalance your brain after that kind of hyperkinetic state that it gets into with EMF. The EMF does actually make your sleep more difficult as well. So you want to push things away from your bed and
Right.
get,
Turn it off.
that's another thing, you want to get plenty of sleep. So,
I always turn our Wi-Fi off at night. It's like set to turn off, and I feel like that helps
mhm.
everybody. Plus, my son won't want to get on his phone or something late because it's off.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and I love everything you're saying because I resonate with it so much. It's so many of the changes I've tried to make for my family because we're sort of in a hyper state a lot more.
yeah.
The kind of brains we are. Oh, now we have to meet the cat. Yes.
Yes, I'm going to
Oh,
try to hush her while we do until we talk.
she's
Okay.
adorable. Aw. Um, no, but
Okay.
oh my gosh, I love speaking with you about this because it's so many things that I want to tell my audience and I do with my family, how much it can help everyone with their brain health. This has been so amazing to talk with you. I think there was one more question I wanted to ask you. What can someone expect if they're working with you as a client? And we'll tell everybody how to find you so they can work with you because I'm sure everybody wants to get on your schedule today. But what could somebody expect? Like what's the process a little bit look like so they know what to expect? Do they need to be in person with you? Like talk about what the process is.
Yeah, I love working with people. I love the transformation that I get to see. I have to tell you that the methods that I use are so powerful. I've been stunned by it. I've been doing this for 8.5 years, and I'm
Wow.
still regularly surprised by what's possible. So what you can expect, at minimum, is to discover what those underlying causes are that are driving whatever you're struggling with, and that in itself is super powerful. So that's at minimum. That being said, so sometimes people come to me and I will be able to get the at major underlying causes. So I say, oh, you have a toxin that's contributing 66% to whatever your problem you're having, right? And sometimes I get, well, okay, the remaining 36% is due to a huge variety number of different things, but we don't know exactly what it is, right? So
Okay.
sometimes the underlying causes could be about something else that's going wrong. Maybe there's for example, I recently was working with a client with depression. We found out it's Parkinson's disease, not depression, but it's
Wow.
manifesting as depression, right? So sometimes there's an underlying disease that needs to be addressed. And I'm not qualified to diagnose, but I do give what I call an armchair diagnosis in
Yeah.
order to help us get at what are the root causes that need to be addressed. So you'll get answers.
Mm-hmm.
Most likely there's it's once in a great while I won't be able to figure out what's going on, but that's so rare these days. It's
Yeah.
almost and that's partly because I do more than just the emotion code and body code, but I'm constantly learning, whether it's from Western medicine or Eastern medicine, or from psychology, from behavioral neuroscience. There's just so many different aspects that I bring into this so that I can ask good questions.
Right.
So you'll get answers, but I also have really powerful ways of releasing the problems that we find. Okay. So sometimes it's going to involve habit change. And I do have a lot of great tools for that. But not only that, I release the barriers, the emotional barriers that get in the way of habits, unhealthy habits, right?
Right. Of how to
Um,
start it.
yeah. And then I mentioned earlier about how I release toxins and pathogens. Sometimes you need supplements. Sometimes it's going to be about diet. If your sleep is not healthy, we may need to work on that, and we can get to the root causes of that. There's a lot of things with not only with the Western medicine approach, but the Chinese medicine approach I can bring into that. So there's what I do with the emotion code, the body code, is we basically identify imbalances and we release them. And there are often what like to call issues in our tissues. So there's
Yeah.
metaphysical underpinnings to chronic disease.
Yeah.
That's the stories that our tissues are
Oh,
expressing. So
holding.
yeah, so it's fascinating. Like, for example, with autoimmune disease, which is one of the things that I like to help people with, your tissues, your immune system is attacking your own tissues. And
Yeah.
why is that? Because at a tissue level, your body can often believe it deserves to be attacked. Okay. It does not mean that you completely manifest that on every level, but it means at the tissue, at the deepest subconscious level, that may be what's happening for you. And I can't say that that's for everybody,
Wow.
but
Can
maybe
that
some
be
variation of that,
generational? I'm
right?
sorry. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to ask. Could that be generational too? Why the tissues are holding it?
Definitely.
Like I think about
Mm-hmm.
diabetes and how that's generational, not type 2, type 1,
Mm-hmm.
like
They both
those type
are.
of things.
Yes. I mean, they both can be. I'll
Yeah.
say that. Mm-hmm.
So I just thought about how much, and rheumatoid arthritis and all of these things that
Yeah.
are connected. Yeah. Wow. That's
Yeah.
super interesting.
Yeah, and for most chronic diseases, and sometimes it's about sometimes it's recovery from injury, for example. So it could be physical pain and chronic pain. There are metaphysical underpinnings that are a key component. I won't say they're the only, but sometimes they're the only component that keep us stuck, right? And so we
Right.
do need to address the emotional. Our bodies are a lot of times we decide we think that if we have a physical issue, that a doctor or a physical fix is going to be sufficient. And I'm telling you that in most cases, that's not enough.
Right.
Usually the body needs to heal emotionally too, to whatever physical manifestation we are experiencing. And that's, again,
Right.
that's another reason why this method is so powerful, is because the emotional aspect is just as important as the physical, and vice versa.
Oh my gosh. I couldn't agree more. And I'm so amazed at what you do. I can't wait to share your information with everybody on my list. This is
Thank you.
awesome. So I guess then how can we learn more about you? And I'll drop all the resources. But how can we learn more about you? What's your website and just whatever else you want to tell us?
Yeah, my website is tryholisticbrainhealth.com.
Okay.
I am currently in the process of rebranding from Lifelong Energize. So if you see that, know that I'm in the process of switching over, and I will be launching a new website hopefully within the month. I've been working on
Awesome.
that and had some hiccups, but I'm hoping to get that out in the month. So but the Tri Holistic Brain Health will be going to the new website once that's launched. So
Great.
that's the best way to find me. You can certainly schedule a complimentary consultation if you'd like to talk more about what your struggles are. Happy, just look on my contact page and you'll be able to find something there. So that's really the best way to reach me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Wong. This is so awesome. I've loved speaking with you. It's so nice to hear a professional when all the different strategies I've tried with my family, I'm like, yes, okay, I'm going the right way. It just feels so much better to know that you are, when you start working on these things and integrating these things, you can make a difference. So I'm
Yeah.
so happy you could do this chat with us today. I'm going to screen record this and put it on every channel I can think of, my YouTube and all that stuff, and it'll be on your page. If anyone has questions or watches this on the replay, please drop. You can tag either one of us below, and Dr. Wong can get back to you with answers. I can get back to you with answers if I'm helpful for what you need. So thank you, everyone, so much for tuning in. And please get in contact. Go to tryholisticbrainhealth.com right now. Go do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicole. It's been a pleasure.